We'd like to thank GoDaddy.com, OmniSend.com, and WooCommerce.com, our sponsors, for supporting today's episode.
Hello, you're listening to Emerging Tech, part of the Open Web Conversations channel and Open Channels FM production. And I guess we're kind of co-hosting today. I'm Dave Lockie, and with me I've got Robert Jacobi. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hey, Dave. Nice to see you again. Long time.
Always
It's great to be back on Open Channels for 2026.
Yeah, it's I can't believe it's February already. And as we were just joking before we started recording, feels like a lot's happened this year already.
It's January is like the longest month in the world. Because all the planning for everything else happens, and you have to get it done in like 4 weeks. So, yep.
That's 90% of 2026 done then, yeah?
If only.
And maybe this is a segue. So we're just going to have a bit of a chat about the AI landscape today, because I think there's so much changing all the time. It's very difficult to pin down like a fixed agenda much in advance. So to segue, I would say I feel like my 2026 has been significantly expanded in terms of time, just because I can get so much more done. And I feel like there are like now multiple Daves doing multiple projects simultaneously. So I'm wondering whether we have actually compressed all of 2026 into 1 month already in terms of work.
Yeah, the problem is now the expectation is that there will always be multiple Daves every single month of the year. That's the problem. We joke and talk about how internet time exists. Now we have AI time, which is another magnitude of difference in what needs to get done and what needs to get accomplished, and what the expectations are of consumers, businesses, etc.
Yeah, it is in equal parts exhilarating and daunting. That's the tension I live with daily. How about you?
It's the ever-changing environment is what is fun to get up for in the morning. Technology is the space that you and I are in, and theoretically everyone else who's listening to this podcast is also in to some degree. And
if they're not, they're probably in the wrong place, because this is going to be a tech-heavy conversation, right?
That's right. But anything that continues to engage the brain and causes just a tint of stress makes you work harder and keeps you going longer as an actual human being versus an agentic bot. And we'll get to that, I'm sure.
I am sure we will as well. Yeah, it's a lot. I think we can just reflect as humans that it's a lot. But I often hear and see people talking about technology in this with this weird reference frame of, oh, like it's changing. Like, things are changing. Like, do we want this change or not? Like, but that's the very nature of technology. Like, if you work in tech, the thing that you must expect is change, and honestly, change at the fastest pace. Right? I don't know if you've seen that graph where you have the rate of change of technology, which is the fastest change, and then the rate of change of like society and people's behavior, and then at the bottom you have like the legislation and the policy and the regulation that tries to then sort of deal with all of that. And they move at very, very different speeds, and that gap is widening minute by minute at the moment.
This will probably get me in a little bit of trouble, but that bottom part on legislation is interesting because it moves differently depending on what region you're in. And obviously, and I'm going to compare it to EU versus US legislation, and how legislation in the US actually, I think, is still like 1903 regarding a lot of this technology. And at least EU legislation, for better or for worse, for right or wrong, is attempting to understand it, the technology spiral, better.
Yeah.
Not to say that they've gotten it right. Again, I'm not picking sides here. I'm just saying that there seems to be more action on the European side of the technology discussions than there is on the US side.
I mean, you're right. Thanks, EU, for cookie banners and for now KYC, meaning like every crypto transaction in the EU has to be KYC. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure I'm such a fan, but you're right. They do seem to at least be doing something further. Although, you know, the US has got the stablecoin bill now, was the Genius Act, and Trump seems to be more tech oriented, or at least his administration has been, than Biden's, who I suspect was struggling even in the early
Comprehension
days
of the totally agree. I just don't know whether that means less regulation or more regulation or what that looks like on our end. And I don't think I'd be the first person to say that we don't know where it's going to go.
No, quite. Well, we've had the Trump meme coin, so that's one of the worst things that could have happened.
You know, I'm going to bash meme coins, period. They're all the worst thing. I don't care whose name is on it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, they're the worst thing if you don't understand the game. But like the way that they behave is... Anyway, we're getting onto crypto. We should be talking about...
We're totally going off track, but, you know, again, this is supposed to be a banter, and that's where we're going to wind up at. And,
well,
you know...
it's also all convergent, right? You know, the expectation that one tech doesn't affect another tech is something that I found like a really interesting component of the AI narrative arc, as you suddenly see, you know, we're going from, oh, it can write a funny poem to, oh, it's driving Unreal Engine and creating like real explorable worlds on the fly from my photo library, you know, like this. And that, you know, the same thing is applying to biology and drug discovery and protein synthesis. And suddenly, you know, like yesterday, the stock market exploded because Claude released like a legal, I can't remember what it's called now, but like a legal tool. And so that's where I think it starts to get very interesting, right? Just to speak back to those like layers of change, like pace layer change. I don't think it's tenable that legislation technology continues to operate at that level when the AI can understand and navigate that technology. Like that's totally asymmetric, because inevitably there are loopholes and workarounds, and I mean that's why your tax code is so big, right? Because it's full of corporate loopholes and workarounds.
Yes, but AI will now find all those loopholes for you, right?
And democratize them. Democratizing tax optimization or something.
Theoretically, until someone doesn't like it. But I mean, your point is spot on that, you know, AI is moving all these things forward in places that us as super tech geeks not necessarily think about. You mentioned, you know, pharmaceuticals, biology, taxes, legal, legislation, all that. And those sort of that long tail of AI is actually the majority of AI that most people wind up using, whether they realize it or not. And, you know, we can get into the whole open source, e-commerce, WordPress, WooCommerce universe, and I'm sure we will. But, you know, hopefully we're at least some level of the forefront of this discussion. But, you know, what are the ramifications, you know, down the road for everyone else? And how can we, in maybe even the smallest of ways, channel all that energy, no pun intended, given how many resources AI utilizes, in certain ways?
So what's on your, I'll give you two questions you can choose from. Either what's on your mind most around AI, like what is there that you'd like to banter about, or like what is your day-to-day AI usage look like? What things are you building or using, or like what's the most kind of impactful change for you?
I already forgot the second question, or first question, because I've already gone down the road on the second question. Day to day, because day to day, AI is almost it's getting there, because I still have to actually type. I just can't scream out loud into the ether, at least confidently. about what I want done, but a lot of it is taking away sort of that executive assistant role of my life. And I'm a very much first adopter, except in very close settings, because especially with tools like AI, the security, privacy, paranoia hits hard, and I'm not willing to give, Claude, ChatGPT, whoever, Gemini, blah blah blah, access to my calendars, to my contacts, or any of that information. That's not going to happen. Um, but can I run discrete tests against content that I provided very specifically? Yes. And do I do that often? Yes. Do I want it to solve problems and create spreadsheets for me with discrete data that I've already vetted for, let's call it Jacobi GDPR purposes? Yeah, I'll do that
GDPR.
yes, Jacobi data protection. I love that. Hold on, let me get one of my agents to get that domain name.
You don't
But
have
that's
them
kind of what
listening
it
in
is.
and like actioning this automatically. Where are you? You're
Oh
so
God,
far
no,
behind.
absolutely not. There are no devices in my household that are connected to the internet. I just don't do that. And I think that's a good thing because it allows me to test an extreme case often. Like, why doesn't this work? Oh, because the refrigerator is not connected to the internet. So that kind of AI does not need to exist in my life today, I say, because who knows what it'll look like in 3, 5, 10 years. And maybe I'll have my own little AI cube box that takes care of all this without any of those concerns. But at the moment, it really is. It's a lot of those sort of like that grunt work that has to take place, whether you're in a sales role, marketing role, executive role, or whatnot. It's just so much faster and easier to get basics done. And as a perfect example, just as sort of a hobby kind of thing, I need to redo my personal website.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is just like, hey, AI bot, go through the site, tell me the content that's relevant, tell me how to pull it out, put it into a CSV that I can import into a new site, call it a day. So that takes me 30 seconds to type out because I'm a slow typer. And then I have everything ready, in 2 minutes. It's ridiculous. And that kind of efficiency is awesome. And having been a developer for a long time, I can even remember the SQL commands that I have to go through to get all that done exactly how I'd want it. And AI gets you 80, 90, 95, 99% of the way there. Fine. If I have to tweak a CSV for another 10 minutes, that's still 1 hour of my life as opposed to a week of my life to get stuff done. And everyone's realizing it across the industry, whether it's in marketing, sales, development, whatnot.
So let's switch gears and talk about your view on how it's changing what we do for work. And I mean that specifically as in you and I, we work within the WordPress and WooCommerce ecosystem, but let's also like step back one concentric circle and look at, I guess, like the open web as well. Like what are you seeing?
There are less humans on the open web than there ever have been, and it's only getting worse. I mean, even where I'm at now at Blackwall, we do these internal reports on how much traffic we're seeing, and it's 55, 60% of all traffic is bot agent driven at this point. So, who is actually benefiting from all the content? How are you as an SMB, whatever platform you're using, benefiting from the content? Are humans actually even interacting with you at all? And back in the day, I'll pretend I'm a lot older than you, that there's this question, okay, we have to dumb down the internet because people read it only in 30 seconds. Well, now you have like 0.3 seconds to actually read the internet because it's not you reading the internet. It's, your agent, your RSS feed, your whatnot that's making decisions for you. And it's small. The adoption around agentic is not huge today, but when everyone has an app on their phone that says, "I'm your happy agent, let me do whatever you'd like me to do," that traffic will all of a sudden take over 90% of the web. And how do we understand what that traffic management does for us as, site owners, site developers, e-commerce owners? Are we building out separate API driven interfaces directly for those agents? Does that mean now we have to do twice the amount of work, but 90% of the work is only for the agents, but we have to spend way too much time on the humans that might accidentally visit our sites at this point? Those are the kind of questions that kind of bug me about like who's actually using the internet in a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a deep concern for sure. What came up for me while you were talking is this idea of like expansion and compression. I think certainly my experience at the moment sounds like yours as well, is like, the human input is often quite high level. Like I've got a high level idea or I have a high level intent, and maybe we can come back and talk about intent, because that's definitely my kind of primary mental model for where things are going. But we then kind of give it to this sort of like expansion system, which then goes and takes like, an idea, like a couple of lines, and produce a blog post out of it, or like, a graphic or something else. And then at the other end of the pipeline, you've got the consuming AI, which is trying to condense down all of this text or the image or whatever to like what this person just needs to know to like continue the task that they're on. And I don't think that's always the case. Let me just roll on to this one, and then we'll stop, and I'll let you respond. But I wrote a post for the Automatic Design blog a little while ago around content for fun versus content for purpose. And I know I'm making balloons on the screen, but
Yeah, just saw the balloons.
thank you, AI, making our day just a little bit better. And I guess the idea of that is sometimes you need a bit of information in order to continue your journey, and it's really just like utilitarian. What's the weather going to be like tomorrow, or what's the recipe for this thing? What you have on the other hand is like beautifully written prose. Maybe it's a book, or it's a piece of music, or it's a theatre production, or something that is worthy of consumption. Like the content, the consuming of the content is the end in itself. Like, sure, you might want a summary of a Netflix series just to decide whether you want to watch it or not, but when you sit down to watch it, it's not a better experience if it's just like a series of bullet points that has been like compressed down for you. Whereas if you're deciding whether tomorrow's a good day to go to the museum or go for a bike ride, like you don't sit there and watch the weather roll across the screen and sit there with your family and do that. And so that's one of the things that I try and use when I'm thinking about how experience design is going to change, is that you probably do have those two different levels, and it's not always clear, and we can see what happens when that gets perverted. So like a great example for me is looking for a recipe online, right? My intention is I just want to make like the world's best chicken carne, for example. I search for it, and then I have to read like 4 A4 sides, like a whole newspaper story about this granny's old recipe that she found in the back of a wagon and blah 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 before you get to the actual recipe, right? Like, who's reading that for entertainment? Nobody. It's entertainment for
Nobody.
Google, right?
Nobody.
So anyway, I think that maybe that's a helpful way to think about whether what you're doing is something that you should get across as concisely as possible, or just, it's an experience you want people to linger on and not reduce down?
So I'm so glad you brought up cooking, and that I'm going to assume that that's a true story about cooking, because I'm the cook in the home, and that is my thing. And I honestly have plugins that when I go to a recipe site will just take me right to the recipe and not mess around with any of the fluff, because I just need to know, do I have the ingredients? Can I do this? I've been cooking long enough to know that, yes, this makes sense. This is a good mix. And it's gotten even worse, because now when I just type it into Google, that summary is, again, that 95% good enough. Like, okay, so, and I literally just did this the other day. I can't remember what it was for. I think it was just for some like silly roast chicken thing, but I had a question about whatever it was. And the summary told me everything. So I didn't even click on the link. All I did was just go to Google, and Gemini gave me an answer that was like, oh, yeah, that's right. I should do this low then high, not high then low, or whatever the weird matrix of information was that I needed at that time. But it was just instantaneously available. I didn't have to scroll
Life stories.
page through like an old fashioned cookbook, of which I have way too many, or scroll through a bunch of stuff of granny stories. That's great, and that's great for a blog, but does that content become completely useless in this new internet? Do we want Granny's cooking stories? And if we do would we rather just go to a site called Granny's Cooking Stories versus I need a recipe?
Hang on, Granny's Cooking Stories. I'm seeing a Netflix series coming on here.
I'm seeing Automatic running a site called Granny's Cooking Stories.
And I guess for me, something that I've wrestled with, like my role at Automatic has been around like the impact of like technological evolution. So I joined to look at Web3. Now I'm working more on strategy more broadly, but of course strategy involves looking to the future, identifying trends, thinking how they're going to impact their business, etc. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about the brand promise, I guess, of Automatic and of open source generally, which is around freedom, and thinking about how the context around that freedom has changed as the world around us has evolved. And I think freedom is a benefit, but you always have to weigh up costs and benefits. Like if something is freer, but 50 times more expensive or slower or harder to use, then like freedom isn't enough on its own, right? Like freedom could be a differentiator if everything else is equal, because, or like near equal, because then that's like a personal preference thing. Like, oh, I prefer to use this, right? I'll take a bit of a hit for it.
I can set up Claude at home, but that's going to make me one of 30 people that are going to do that, versus everyone else who's just going to go to any of the publicly available AI engines.
Yeah. And so,
I mean, that's freedom, but it's freedom with a price, because it takes time. It may take hardware that I may or may not have available, so that means I need to buy something. I may have a level of personal confidence and satisfaction in doing that. Really, most people, 99.79s, will not. They want to go to the gas station, pump their car, whether it's petrol or electricity or whatnot. They just want to be able to go, click a button, get it done. Because we have other things that we care about as human beings, opposed to what does this open source technology stack mean? And that is the trickiest thing for folks to understand, and why that matters. And a lot of people don't think it matters, and they only realize when it's like security. Security only matters when you realize that, oh, everyone else got hacked, but I didn't. that life insurance. It
Or the
only
other way
matters
around.
until I die.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's deeply
It
important.
only matters until it really, really matters. And then when it
Yes.
really, really matters, it's a catastrophe. It really is.
Yeah. And I don't think we're at a point yet where you can run something which is as close as it needs to be to the frontier models on like a bunch of Mac minis at home. I mean, you can get like reasonably close, but I don't think anything is quite at the level of like Opus 4.5 or whatever it is. I think we will see the day where it is possible to run like a local machine and to have something that's as good as the frontier models are today. But then, of course, like the frontier models will have moved on as well. And
but it's the 80-20 rule. Is it good enough? Like if I buy my Apple TV in 3 years and it has a private secured LLM, yeah, that'll do the trick for most people, right? I mean, it's sort of that, again, 80-20 rule about, solves 80% of the, I'm going to screw up the rule. Anyway, 80-20 rule. 80% of the people will be happy with 20% of the functionality. That's what I'll say.
something like that.
Something like that.
So I guess, this is a big problem, really, because for me, I guess the original sin of the internet was not having two things baked in. Really, it's really one, which is an open source equivalent to data, right? Because as soon as you needed a database, then you had to have like infrastructure to run on it. It's not like open source where people could just download it, because like a database that's connected to a web application by necessity, it has to be a server, right? It can't just be something you run locally. And so as soon as you have a server, then at some point you need some hardware, and hardware implies like infrastructure implies ownership and cooperation, and that's like a very centralizing force, right? And we've seen that with the dominance of hosting companies within the WordPress scene, right? Like you can host tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of websites. The more you host, the better it is for you and kind of for your customers, unless you're not incentivized.
Unless you're totally
Right,
slipshod, the fact that you're gaining efficiencies by hosting more and more folks and understanding the issues with more and more folks.
And scales of
that's
economy
better.
and like network intelligence and all of those things, right? Like
Correct.
you
And
should be able
that's
to
better
do.
for that next new customer, because they will have already sort of acquired all that knowledge, again, by only spending a few dollars a month. This is what keeps me up at night as a how do I put this nicely? Open source lunatic. How does that matter to anyone else that's not an open source lunatic? And I just saw an article by what's that professor out of New York? Hold on. This is actually worth me looking up while we're having a conversation, because
That's a good one.
it's a good one. What's his name? Blah 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 blah. Why can't I get his name out? Scott Galloway.
Hey, Prof G in the house.
So Scott Galloway was talking about stuff, and I'm going to refrain from injecting any politics into this discussion because my life's too short for these discussions.
That's a tough job if you're invoking the Galloway.
But let's say Prof G built a site regarding some political topic and lists a bunch of technology firms that you should be aware of for different reasons for his sake. I'm going to put it on Prof G's shoulders at this point. But then being the smartass I am, I do what's CMS on that site? Well, it should be on WordPress. It's not. It's on a private SaaS company who may or may not actually be contrary to his aims in this discussion. And how do we get folks like Scott Galloway to be open source facing? Because they are very public in a lot of things. And they're missing that point on how open source and the tools they are personally using are not open source, which can be inferred as diametrically opposed to what he's trying to say. Honestly, at this point, I'm thinking I should just reach out to Scott Galloway and say, like, this is the conversation I just had on open channels, and why are you not using WordPress?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he makes his own tech stack choices. I'm going to be honest. I think he's probably more.
See, so this is where it drives me crazy. That's the problem is, like, if I'm going to have my car needs to have 4 tires, my technology should be open source. Those should be like the top level of requirements for anything I do. And I'm not saying I'm great about this, because I live in my little Apple universe and I'm quite happy with my little Apple products, but I find them safer and more secure. And I have other reasons for utilizing them. And then you have a punnet table about what makes sense and what doesn't.
Right.
But
cost benefit right there. Like, you could be freedom maxing with, Linux, but you're not, because that would be a lot of sysadmin for somebody that just wants to use the tech.
Well, and I only have so many resources in my heartbeat for whatever this lifetime is, and I need to also optimize those personally, right? And I think whether everyone realizes that or not, that's part of the case in everything we do. Is like, okay, do I really want to walk 4 miles for a sandwich that takes me then 2 hours to do, or do I call one of the delivery services?
Yeah. So where do you think the battleground or opportunities are for freedom online? If we're saying that open source is like a valuable part of freedom, it's one component of freedom, right? Not the only one, but definitely one of them. Where is that fight? Is that fight happening? Is it even part of the conversation at the moment?
I'd like to think that a fight needs to occur between SaaS and open source. The GPL, as most folks are using it, taking advantage of it, does not force people to turn content over or works over back to the projects, as long as they're running internally. I will say Automatic obviously does a wonderful job of that, because the work they do at .com and whatnot winds up, significant portion of that winds up back in the actual WordPress project. So many companies are doing things internally or with SaaS that should be pushed back out to the public as a whole, so we can innovate and grow with them, and and be free to make technological decisions. And I'll even take this out of the WordPress realm. We know who are good contributors or not, but there are oil companies, there are industrial companies that are relying on open source tools. Certainly, the consumer product companies are. That stuff should be out there. If you're using it internally and saying it's SaaS and I'm following the GPL correctly, well, we need to change the GPL to enforce more accountability and allowing the public to reap some of the rewards that the public has put into those projects. Because let's take my family. It's not just me who's contributing, working open source. It's the rest of the family who's doing things. Their money and time is helping me do money and time to the open source project. So everyone in this household will benefit from that. And that only expands as you go out and to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I have been thinking a lot about what an age of software superabundance looks like. We are, I would say, we've been in an era of optimization. So I'd characterize it kind of like this. Let's use like e-commerce as an example. So e-commerce was innovative to start with, Amazon was an innovation, and PayPal and Stripe. These were all sort of things that emerged, and the whole idea of like having a shop and selling online was innovation. And at a certain point, that innovation started to morph into optimization as people understood what a cart page was and should look like, and how it should function, and a checkout page, and a product catalog and a product view page, and what are the patterns that people have become accustomed to and that align with the actual jobs to be done. So then we go into an innovation phase, and that's where I think SaaS and proprietary can win, because in the innovation phase, what you really want is like loads of developers hacking away and like creating the patterns, and then emerges out of that the patterns that have the Lindy and can move into optimization. But when you get to that phase, digital product practice is about being able to hypothesize, experiment, analyze, and iterate. It's the classic kind of OODA loop, isn't it, from like flying planes as like military and stuff, but just applied to software.
And then we start looking at,
possible.
shopping cart abandonment and, metrics that were never envisioned necessarily in e-commerce 1.0.
Yeah. And so my point about optimization is that SaaS and proprietary set you up better to do that, because they centralize data. Like the more users and data that you have, the more effective the experimentation that you can do, and the faster you can roll those changes out. Like the faster your OODA loop is, basically. And so that for me has been the last 10-ish years of e-commerce, right? It's just been like optimization. We've seen Shopify and Squarespace and Wix like do really well, because they can just take those patterns and optimize them. But AI, I think, brings us back to a new era of innovation, because those patterns that were maximally useful and
proprietary,
well,
just those patterns,
yeah,
theoretically.
But I mean, like the patterns themselves are changing, right? Because now you have, we've gone from open web and Google search and ads to LLM conversations with no such kind of obvious place to stick ads, for example. So, if people aren't seeing ads and they're not going to Google to do search, then how do you get traffic? And so the whole kind of thing is going to change. And we don't know what that looks like, which means we're in an innovation space, right? Because there is no established pattern for a lot of this stuff. And so I think that means that open source should win. Like innovation happens better in freer and more open environments. I don't think that's about regression. I don't think just going back to I don't think we're going back to the heydays of, why Woo succeeded in the first place, for example, because it had X and Y and Z and was optimized for innovation for that era of e-commerce. I think it's an era that rhymes but doesn't repeat. So we have to think about what does meaningful freedom for both developers and customers look like in the AI innovation era. And for me, I think one of those things is probably, I think at the same time, that's bad for proprietary and SaaS, for at least a lot of them. And you can see that in the stock market now, because you have, I don't know whether you saw this, Chamath, the Silicon Valley VC guy. He started this project called 8090.ai, which is essentially like, he calls it software factory. But the whole premise is, if you're an enterprise, you're probably paying ridiculous money for, SaaS per seat license fees, because that was actually the rational economic choice when building software was difficult and expensive. And you just needed to move fast and get things done. But we're potentially, I would argue we're now firmly in the era of software superabundance, where those constraints and costs have changed. And so I think a lot of enterprises will just choose to build exactly what they need, rather than, paying for a prepackaged thing that does some of what they need, but is also subject to these constraints. So there, I think, is that open source? Like, probably, because you probably want to leverage the best-in-class open source components to build your overall system out. So you kind of drop down a level to like, what are these? Could be Python libraries, could be WordPress plugins, whatever it is, but you can like take the Lego blocks and then like build your own models instead of having to like
See,
just buy.
I'm going to have to like totally interject and disagree, because do developers care about that? Do they just run to? I mean,
No,
the
the LLMs do.
The amount of MVCs, but LLMs don't care unless there's what cost does it cost me more money to use C# or Python, and that'll be the determining factor in how those applications get built. The amount of MVCs I've seen come my way that are something lovable.app is ridiculous, and there's open source isn't even part of the conversation. It's what can I get done today, and
the
who
LLMs
knows?
are using JavaScript frameworks, most of which are open source, like under the hood, right? And that's my point: is you don't need to. We often won't even know whether what is being built is open source or not. But
Correct.
LLMs will prefer to use, all other things being equal, something that is like openly and freely available and licensable, and to which they can access like the entire of the source code and change it at will, because it doesn't involve law and money and terms and conditions and like human level stuff. So we can see
So
that.
then what's the,
yeah.
I totally hear you. What's the incentive for humans to continue pushing content into that mechanism?
How do you mean pushing content? Like, you mean
Why do I want to be an
open
open source? Yeah. If
if
it's going to be eaten up by a machine, and there'll be no. I've been in open source for almost 30 years. So, there are many types of rewards for open source contributors, financial, esteem, professional rankings, so on and so forth. If that just gets all eaten up by a machine, and no awareness to those developers occurs across all the benefits that an open source developer might want, why would anyone continue to participate in that process? That's an insanely broad question, but I mean, I've seen the shrinking of open source contributors and communities over the last 3 decades.
Here's a good follow-up question. Do you think it's important that people continue to be the ones that develop open source software?
Well, that is the absolute logical next step. Will AI be the open source developer going forward and optimizing? I mean, philosophically, humans talking to humans, it's important for humans to be involved in the conversation. If we abdicate our creative responsibilities for open source to AI, then it doesn't matter, right?
Well, let's talk about it a different way. Like, why isn't all software open source?
At this point, I honestly have no idea. It is so much of it is commoditized in the first place, given all the work that decades have put into making open source software. I mean, thank goodness for Linux, thank goodness for PHP, thank goodness for C, and yada yada. We can go on and on, JavaScript, and we've even seen the clawbacks. Java being a wonderful example, because that's really where I got my feet wet in open source and how that got clawed back. And it's just not part of the conversation as much anymore for most folks. Yes, does a supremely optimized C-esque garbage collecting engine still matter for lots of the world? Yes, but so did Fortran, 40 years ago, and that's just not part of the conversation anymore.
So whenever this kind of proprietary idea and pattern was introduced, like, why was it introduced?
Because distribution was constrained. If we go back to the 80s and 90s, pre-internet, you actually had to pay money for floppies, for CDs, for DVDs. of content and all of that. So there was an actual meaningful incremental cost to deploying software. There is no meaningful cost to deploy software on the internet right now. I mean, it would literally cost me. I could buy one cup of coffee today, and to deploy a bit of software would take that for the whole year.
So I guess the point I'm trying to drive towards is that there is a concept of proprietary software because at some point there was a cost to software, both creation and distribution. Like, software developers were scarce,
scarcity, yeah.
and distribution was incrementally expensive, and so people started to charge. And if they were going to charge, then they needed to protect that IP in some way so they could make a living to continue to be able to do the thing, right? Like that's the and so
and the buy side wasn't there either. So if there were only,
but these are human things, right? These are human things,
correct.
and so I guess I go back to is it Charlie Munger? Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, right? Where is the incentive for AI to do anything other than proprietary? I'd argue that proprietary is by and large it's an outcome driven by human incentives, not by agent incentives, not by AI incentives.
I'll go resource utilization.
Mhm.
Let's think back to why music became almost free for a long time.
Music is free. You can just sing.
You can
Plug
just
it for you
well,
and
you can
sing
just sing, but and then we have the Napsters of the world distributing things. And would the cost for the companies that are running the agents be reduced if they could incentivize people to run agents locally, federated somehow, whatnot, those kinds of things? There are mechanics where AI might be like, hey, the SETI project. I ran that on my desktop for 10 plus years
Did you
to
find
help
any
find.
aliens?
No, I did not. I'm still looking. Even though the project's been shut down, I'm still looking, out the window.
Maybe you did.
hoping
It's
to
just
see.
that they haven't figured it out yet.
Fair.
You don't know, do you?
But
Anyway, tangent.
I guess my point being that there are ways we can incentivize people to get better product, and AI, because of that requirement, might actually lower costs and therefore increase profit. So, I mean, there are commercial mechanics that can be taken advantage of that accidentally, or in this case, I'll say purposefully, engage open source and make open source a more meaningful part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I guess on my mind is I think AI is bad for for a lot of SaaS companies as we know them today. I think a lot of that gets replaced with custom built stuff that enterprises just build for themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is proprietary or open source, because it probably doesn't matter a lot of the time. Some of it's going to be proprietary because it's going to be sensitive, or at least the data that's flowing through it is going to be sensitive. But I do think it does change the market conditions. And I think, as I said, we've kind of seen that in the stock market, right? Like if you don't have defensibility as a SaaS, then it's not a good time at the moment.
Maybe we just look at defensibility the wrong way. Being able to hide behind a legal shield is not defensible because laws can change very quickly, and then all of a sudden, companies disappear or whatnot, and then there are acquisitions and whatnot. Defensibility is better value for the end user at the end of the day, and that end user can be internal or external, obviously. But I mean, the value being, can I get it done faster, better, smarter? Have I improved on what I'm trying to produce? I like building things, and I think people like building things and getting things built for them.
Well, it's a
And
it's a good time for you and those people then, because we can get an awful lot built and done at the moment.
Yes, sir. Then and then there's security and the hosting of it, but that's what Automatic and Blackwall are for.
Yeah, and I think that's that's another interesting thing to think about, isn't it? Like if models, if intelligence is the new kind of thing, then like we go from tools to intelligence, then intelligent systems, those also need hosting. Those models can be open source and open weights or proprietary.
Absolutely.
Feels like, to me, that feels like the level at which freedom is most important at the moment. You said this yourself, actually, like just to call back to earlier in the conversation, you don't have smart devices in your home. You don't Solo OpenClaw onto the root of your desktop computer because you don't trust where that data is flowing compared to the value that you think you get back with it from it. But if you had your own bot in the corner and you were sure that that data wasn't going anywhere else, then why not? Like, just connect your whole life to it because it's acting in your interests, right?
Correct. And if I feel extra crazy about it, I can just take a hammer to it.
Yeah. Might be expensive, but it would definitely do the job of helping you sleep at night.
Well, exactly. But I mean, I do think there's always that security versus freedom argument, and I think we're more free the more we control our security as close to us. I don't need everyone else controlling my security. I just like to be able to control mine a little bit more, because right now we're not incentivized to do that. We're incentivized to actually give up all of our privacy and security to unknown entities.
I'm struggling to remember which one it was, like the balance between it, but it's often, was it security or freedom? But it's actually more about convenience and it's convenience and freedom that is the real thing that people choose against. Like if it's just easier and it just gets done, then I'll choose that, even if we'll walk. If the road to the prison is downhill and the road to the free nature is uphill, like a lot of people are going to walk downhill because it's easier, right? Anyway, those people will go to jail. They might not like it. We'll walk uphill together, Mr. Jacobi, into the sunny green hills of nature and freedom.
I just hope it's not a Don Quixote moment. That's all I worry about is, am I tilting at the wrong windmill?
There is never a way to know except in the rearview mirror.
Oh. Thank you very much, Dave. On that cheery note, I hope everyone stayed for the whole hour, because this is going to be.
Yeah, thank you to the one listener that forgot to switch podcasts while they were doing something else.
Brilliant.
Lovely to catch up with you. And that was for all you listeners. Me, Dave Lockie, and Robert Jacobi having definitely a meandering AI banter about open source, freedom, and what it all means in the world of AI. So thank you for listening. This has been Open Channels FM.
Again, we'd like to thank GoDaddy.com, Omnisend.com, and WooCommerce.com, our sponsors, for their continued support. Until next time, take care.